Greetings, YouTube. I recently posted a video and someone commented in it, and I apologize for not remembering your name. I'm horrible at that. About arcane spell failure and the absurdity therein, and how the narrative of who gets to wear armor and who doesn't get to wear armor, and does armor in fact interfere with your ability to cast spells of one kind or another, which I think is a really valid topic for conversation. So let's jump right in. Now, when I started playing, I never really questioned why things were the way they were, at least not initially, because I was used to just accepting things as they were handed to me because I was raised in a very controlling home. So if someone said this, that's just the way it was. You didn't actually have to question it because that was dangerous. So when somebody said that, priests or clerics got to wear armor and mages didn't get to wear armor, that seemed perfectly reasonable to me. I didn't actually question it at all. But now, in the year 2023, it is seen to me to be strange that some folks are allowed to wear armor and wield spells and some aren't. Now, even from the earliest iterations of the game as I know it, D&D has always possessed three different schools of magic, three different types, and those have been divine, arcane, and psionic. Yeah, I know psionics are not actually considered to be magic by some folks, but they are. They're just a different variety of magic powers, ones which are fueled by a spell point system as opposed to by spell slots. And the Dreamsguard Press's version for Pathfinder First Edition, in my opinion, is the finest example of psionic rules that have ever been written, period. Their ultimate psionics book is just a treasure trove of gaming potential and of excellence in craft. And it's also weird that we also had strange limitations on what kinds of things that people could learn as far as using weapons. Now, originally we had every single class had very specific weapons, except for fighters could learn everything. Later, 3.5 and Pathfinder First Edition just put them into categories like simple weapons, martial, and then exotic. And that was much better framing in my mind, because there are categories of weapons which are not complex. A spear is not a complex thing. It's got a point on the end. You put it so the point is aiming at the person you want to harm, and you shove. It is far more complex than that in actual use, but the reality is it's not a complex thing in construction or in its basic operation. And it was said that if certain groups didn't use certain weapons, they would not be able to cast spells. So all this is wrapped around in some very meta conversations about why certain classes can do certain things for game balance reasons. It was said that was okay for clerics to wear armor, but they could only wield weapons that wouldn't draw blood. So they were restricted to, crushing, blunt, bludgeoning style weapons, which was quite humorous when I didn't realize that a Lucian hammer was not actually a bludgeoning weapon. In its structure, it's a pole arm with a big pointy stick on it. And it's also mystified me how anyone thought this wasn't going to draw blood. That's a crushing weapon. It's a mace, perfectly allowable for priests to use, and they think that this, when struck against an organic entity, is not going to cause bleeding. Something written by someone that has never actually picked up a weapon in their lives, let alone made one. I made this one. So yeah, that was absurd. But the armor restrictions were equally as absurd, because it was decided that since priests or clerics had a limited selection of spells that were bestowed by them by a god, there was a lot of control there. The GM had a lot of control over what that person could and couldn't do. So letting them have more wiggle room when it came to armor was considered acceptable. Well, as the mages had more variety of spells, no control. There was no external entity controlling what they could and couldn't do with their spells. No one's saying, no, 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 you can't do that in this situation. It was considered acceptable to have a more limited access to armor, and then they had to come up with a justification. Why can't a mage use armor when the guy over there is casting a spell that's very similar to what that mage is doing, and they're allowed to wear plate armor? And then we have psionics, which have no impact one way or the other with armor. A person who has psionics can wear any kind of armor they want to. They may not be trained in it, because that's not the way they spent their life, but it's not going to impact their ability to use psionics, because why should it? Unless they're wearing a helmet lined with lead or something that prevents actual psionics from functioning, they shouldn't have any limitations. But again, they needed to impose limitations upon wizards. So they had to come up with the reasoning. And they just kind of said it interferes with their spellcasting. How? Verbal, semantic, and material are the three most common types of spell components. There are others, but those are the three most common ones. Verbal and material are not impacted by what you're wearing at all. It's just a thing you hold in your hand at the time of the casting and the words that come out of your mouth when you're doing it. In semantic spellcasting, even if it's done in a really theatrical manner, doesn't seem to be that complex. You're not doing handstands. I mean, look at Doctor Strange from the MCU, who is probably that type of magic that those folks are engaged in is very theatrical. But you could do all that stuff with armor on. If that wizard was wearing a leather coat, no one would bat an eye. Leather coats restrict your motion. I've got a horse hide coat in my closet, full length, which is heavy as hell, and I can guarantee you it restricts my motion. But a wizard can wear that without any problem. But you put him in armor, you call it armor, and suddenly they can't? Again, these are external criteria imposed upon someone as a means of balancing the class, of bringing balance to a group that has lots of power, no restrictions on them the way priests have, and so they must in some way be limited, because if they could do anything, everyone would want to play a wizard. Well, some folks wouldn't want to play a wizard that way just because that doesn't fit their ideal. There are people that play characters that don't take advantage of every single thing that's conceivably done. They come up with an idea and they stick with it. So even though they might, for example, be allowed to wear armor, they don't want to because it doesn't fit their idea of how that character is going to interact with the world around them. Yeah, I know, it's amazing. There are people who actually do that kind of thing. But these rules have always been so damn arbitrary. It made no sense that wizards could use this weapon and not that weapon, and it's always been absurd that how is holding a buckler in one hand or a shield going to interfere with your ability to cast a spell? I mean, look at the martial arts in D&D, which are very loose. Martial arts are loosey-goosey, but you can attack with any part of your body you want to. It says right there in the rules that when it comes to martial arts, it isn't just using your fists. It's your forehead, it's your knees, it's your feet. It's whatever you have available at the time to do the job. And yes, you might get imposed with some penalties if you're like holding a box while trying to do it, but that kind of makes sense. But wiggling your fingers, moving your arms around, how is that going to be impacted by the armor you're wearing? Again, it really wouldn't be. Priests get away with it, but mages can't. And then you got the psionic folks over there who chuckle because they can wear anything they don't wear, please. They just don't want to because they're not trained in it. But you, again, have to have those artificial external limitations. Otherwise, the people that write the games know that there will be some segment of the gaming population that will take advantage of every single crack you give them to squeeze through. But the justifications have not been good in my mind. I've seen that kind of thing in fantasy where it's metal. You can't be wearing metal because that interferes with your ability to cast spells. Or sometimes it's a particular kind of metal, um, and that it's a method for, in fact, uh, preventing people from casting spells, like having them in silver chains or, auriculum or whatever it is that the material that prevents magic from flowing, and that will impact in a person's ability to be, arcanely active at that moment. Um, but just to say artificially from outside and say, okay, you can do this and you can do that for reasons, has always fell flat for me. You can just say they aren't trained in it. But what if somebody wants to spend the resources to become trained in it in a game that has feats like 3.5 in Pathfinder? I realize when I'm talking about Pathfinder, I'm always discussing the first edition. If somebody wants to invest in a feat that lets them wear armor because now they're trained in it, how does that change things? If a wizard is wearing full plate, they've got dwarven plate on, the heaviest of the heavy stuff, the stuff that reduces their normal 30 foot speed down to 15 with each foot. Why does that matter? I don't think it does. If someone wants to invest that kind of understanding and training, let them, in my opinion. But if you decided, okay, that people can't wear metal armor to cast spells, at least that makes sense. It would open up non-metal armor, but at least you could say that that was some kind of logical reasoning. I always require druids to be what I call vegetarian. They can't use metal weapons, period. Those types of weapons are considered anathema by the gods of the druids. But other than that, they can use anything they want to. They can use any kind of weapons or armor they conceivably choose, as long as it's not metal. That would make sense for wizards as well. You can't wear metal armor. Okay, go ahead. You can wear Kerboli. You can wear padded. Both are Busher armor types. You could wear armor made from the shell of a giant ant. We had somebody do something like that in the game once. You can wear a shield that's made from the shell of, a turtle. Why not? What would it matter? What impact would it have? Does it throw the balance so far off for you in a game where magic is in reality, where dragons fly around, where people can change the fabric of reality at a whim, and yet somehow a priest, rather somehow a wizard in armor is just a step too far? It's like Peter Jackson not having black hobbits. No, we can have dragons, we can have demons, and we can have those things, but a black hobbit, no, I'm sorry, that's a step too far. So what is it? Why do we do this? Why do we let these artificial rules that are just there to create balance get in the way of our gameplay? Particularly in a game where training is broken down into the acquisition of specific skills. Feats are a wonderful idea. It's like taking a class in college. If you haven't taken that class, you don't get the knowledge that class imparted to you. But if you do, okay, now you're all set. You've taken that class. You have acquired your credits. So if somebody wants to get credits in how to wear light armor, I don't see a problem with it. I don't think that you could just say, no, you can't wear armor because, I've never been a fan of because. That's never been a good justification to me. If you can't come up with a reason that makes sense, I think it's kind of silly, even in a setting where wishes exist and shape change exists and fly spells exist. Just artificially imposing these silly rules on somebody makes no sense to me. It makes as much sense as thinking this thing right here isn't going to cause somebody to bleed.